the essence of this is the criminal activity from the president down, not just these lawyers. And therefore, how are we going to move forward? We're not going to move forward with the Obama administration. We know that, at least not right away. We may have some good results. How can we promote the foreign indictment of these people, and at worst, perhaps, find ourselves with Bush and the others locked into a jail called the United States, which would be a marvelous outcome if that was all we could do. It would at least do that. How can we do that? How can we promote that might have some success? Is there a country we can work through? Is there a way to go forward with that? Mm-hmm. How can we have a clear focus of how to accomplish that?
Thank you for your question. Marjorie?
The Center for Constitutional Rights went to the prosecutor in Germany a few years back and said, will you prosecute Donald Rumsfeld and some other Bush officials for war crimes under universal jurisdiction? And the German prosecutor said, well, we won't prosecute under universal jurisdiction until we're convinced that the United States is not going to prosecute them. So in the meantime, the Congress passed the Military Commissions Act after Bush rammed it through, the way he rammed through the Patriot Act and the Iraq War and a number of other things. And in the Military Commissions Act, Congress purports to, although there's some debate among scholars if it actually would confer criminal immunity or just civil immunity on people who were involved in the torture. So the Center for Constitutional Rights, the National Lawyers Guild, my organization, and others went back to the German prosecutor and said, look, this is evidence that the United States is not going to prosecute these people. Now will you prosecute under universal jurisdiction? And the German prosecutor thought about it for a while and invariably got some pressure from Angela Merkel, and who got pressure from the Obama administration, the Bush administration then, and said, no, we're not going to. There's not a close enough relationship between Germany and these crimes. Now, similar things have happened in France and some other countries. During the Bush administration, Belgium there were charges pending against Donald Rumsfeld and some others in Belgium, and for a few delicious months, Donald Rumsfeld couldn't travel outside the United States without worrying about being arrested because there were real charges pending under universal jurisdiction. So the Bush administration threatened Belgium and said, if you don't amend your universal jurisdiction law and drop these charges against Donald Rumsfeld for war crimes, we are going to arrange to pull the headquarters of NATO out of Brussels, and Belgium backed down. So the problem is that there will be investigations in other countries, but the US governments, and there have been evidently conversations, and I'm not sure the extent of those conversations, the tone of those conversations, between the Obama administration and the Zapatero government in Spain. It remains to be seen whether the Obama administration will engage in the same kind of threats against other countries that the Bush administration did. For example, when Bush removed the U.S. signature from the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court in May of 2002, and after that, then the Bush administration went to about 100 different countries, basically blackmailed them, countries with developing economies, developing democracies, and said, if you don't provide immunity, if any of our nationals are found on your soil, if you don't agree that you will not send them to The Hague for prosecution in the International Criminal Court, then we're going to withdraw foreign aid, and there were threats and blackmail. So if that continues under the Obama administration, it's going to be difficult to work with other countries or to have other countries bringing universal jurisdiction prosecutions, because the United States wields tremendous power, as we all know.
Why aren't we pressing to find out?
Why are we
This is
pressing?
one thing Obama could ignore and we could go forward with.
I think Deborah might have a response.
Well, we've been through this whole effort that some people may be familiar with to impeach Bush and Cheney. which had a fair amount of support. There were 3 years ago, you could walk around with an impeach Bush sign and people would be like, yeah, right, you know, okay, I'm for it. You tell me how to do it. What we lacked at that time is what we really lack now, is a big enough, determined enough mass movement that absolutely will not accept these war crimes. And I don't see looking for a savior from another country. I think it has to be settled here, fundamentally. We need that kind of a movement. And I want to just speak to a subtext, I think, in a little bit of what you asked about, you know, it's not just the lawyers. It's the whole Bush administration. I would call it the Bush regime. True enough. However, I think sitting here in Bolt Hall, we really have to appreciate the role of lawyers. Wasn't it Nuremberg where the lawyers were tried? Isn't it the lawyers that have the supreme responsibility to keep the leaders of any government within the stated law? We want to live in a country where we know what to expect of the government, and that power that it has over us has legitimacy, as Shahid talked about. To me, we need more people recognizing that what the Bush regime did, and if the Obama administration is not stopped from continuing, this does not have legitimacy. We need people who are really grappling with that, and I think then that brings about the kind of movement that infects other countries and gives people the kind of example that we really need to represent. After all, it is our country and our government that has posed the biggest threat to world peace, you know, since Bush took power in particular.
Can I say just one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I'll actually cite an illustrious member of the audience here, someone I certainly greatly admire, Daniel Ellsberg, who I heard speak of recently, a two-part calculus that then counsels essentially do anything and everything we can. So the first part is an empirical ambiguity as to the source of change. We don't actually know how social change happens. It remains an undefined equation. And the precautionary principle, which you see operate in other contexts, for instance, you know, the classic application of it is if climate change is happening, we don't know how catastrophic it is, we know that greenhouse gases contribute to it, so the precautionary principle would say, stop churning out greenhouse gases just in case it might help. And so if we don't know what change, how change actually happens in the macrocosm, and we know that there are opportunities at the margin, you know, like calculus based on those premises would be to do anything and everything that you can. And I understand your point certainly in looking to other jurisdictions, but the only ones we actually have control over are here. And so, you know, I appreciate the point, but I think it ultimately is an application of our own responsibility. Don't forget that the law is ultimately about power. The principle, it has the trappings of principle around it, right? But law is just the mediation of power through means that it appear legitimate. That's why legitimacy matters, right? Legitimacy matters because it's a way to use power without needing a gun. And so if we build power in our society to hold true to the principles that we fought a world war to establish 60 years ago, then we win. And if we don't, we lose those principles. And the blood that was spilled in World War II basically was all in vain, and we're back into a world that is nasty, brutish, and short.
Thank you. I have a question for the lawyers on the panel. In a recent Texas Monthly article, just this past July, as a matter of fact, it was a lengthy article, an interview with Alberto Gonzalez. And he admitted here in this interview, he says, quote, "I had little experience with the Geneva Convention," when he wrote this memo back in January of 2002, advising Bush to basically say that the Geneva Convention did not apply. And he signed it, and it says here that you know, he had little experience, so he relied on Addington, but his signature's on it. I'm wondering that, you know, when it comes to legal issues, for example, you know, malpractice or something to that effect, is there a statute of limitations on that? Is there anything where someone admits, hey, I didn't know what I was doing as a lawyer, but I advised them, you know, publicly saying that? What sort of redress is there for that, if anything, or is it just, you know, at this point,
Well, it's a real good question. The Office of Professional Responsibility, of course, found him pretty much guilty of those kinds of things, but then they got this extraneous fellow in, Margulies, who said that they shouldn't refer it to the proper authorities. I don't know if there's any other redress. Anyone else?
But what I do want to say, that's for Gonzalez, not you and Bybee.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
So,
There's a duty to supervise, certainly, and so, I mean, state bar associations in which lawyers are licensed to practice are all empowered to disbar lawyers who basically fail duties of competence or the duty to supervise. There have been complaints filed, actually Gonzalez was among them in Texas. Every complaint that was filed in the State Bar Association challenging the license to practice of a lawyer complicit in torture has been essentially dismissed without any meaningful review at all. And it reflects, again, the power disparity, right? We can't pretend that principle matters here. It matters to us, right? And it matters integrally, it matters inherently, but in terms of looking for resolution from any set of institutions, whether it's Congress, the executive, the Supreme Court, or the state bar associations, which would be the venue to act on that observation, it is a power calculus, and unfortunately, I guess I'd beg to differ with the late esteemed Mr. Chavez and just say, unfortunately, there are not yet enough of us.